If 2016 was the year that voters turned on their ruling metropolitan elites, 2017 is when we see what takes the place of the established order. From Trump in the US to Brexit in Europe, the developed world is confronted by change. In China, by contrast, this year may see the status quo established yet more firmly with a meeting of the party's most senior body. To look at these developments and their implications for the world economy, I'm joined once again by Mike Jakeman from our global forecasting team. Mike, let's start with the USA. Trump inauguration about to happen. I guess the big question that everybody has in mind at the moment is what kind of a president we're going to see. We know what we saw during the campaign. We're rather hoping, I think, that it will be a slightly different figure who emerges in the White House. What should we be looking out for? What signs should global businesses be concerned about?
Well, I think those hopes are going to be dashed pretty soon, and I think they were perhaps a bit naive to begin with. I understand that because Donald Trump is not particularly ideological and because he's been a member of both the Democrat and Republican parties, the idea was that perhaps we might get a slightly different Trump once he's in office, and perhaps he was just saying what he had to say merely to get elected, but I think that's a pipe dream. The most important indicator we've had so far about what kind of president we're going to be is the identity of the people he's put up to fill his cabinet. And I think if you were trying to pick people who would implement the policies that he has campaigned on, you'd pick exactly the people he's chosen. So, for example, he would like to get rid of Obamacare entirely, and his response to that is to pick a guy, Tom Price, who's actually written an alternative plan for a Republican version of universal health care. So what he's done is he's gone around and he's found people who he thinks will do what he wants. Now, that doesn't mean that they actually will do everything he wants. For example, I think the Mexican wall, which is not symbolic to Trump, he thinks he actually would like to build that massive wall. Those things I don't think will happen because I don't think Congress will allow them. Congress, of course, although it has still got Republican majorities, Republicans remain the party of small government, and I don't think that he'll get a majority support for spending tens of billions of dollars on building the wall, for example. So I think we'll see, in a way, that the biggest restraint on Trump may well come from what is nominally his own party and the fact that they don't like spending money. On the other hand, ideas like the tax cut that he's talked about, both for businesses and for Americans themselves, they're likely to go ahead on a similar sort of scale to what we saw in George W. Bush's first term. So I think in terms of style, we know what Trump is like as a leader. We saw his fairly chaotic press conference last week. I think more of the same on that front. And in terms of the content, well, we've seen what he said he wanted to do on the campaign trail, and I don't see any reason yet to expect we're going to see anything different. But yes, he will be restrained by the Congress he has to face.
Okay, that's a great review of the domestic political outlook. What about the economic impact then of what we expect Trump's policy decisions to be over the first 6 months, year of his administration?
Well, we had an internal meeting the day after the election, and I think people were quite keen to hear what we were going to do with our US growth forecast. And in the end, I think people were slightly disappointed when I said we weren't going to change it at all. And the reason for that is that although Trump is sort of normally a kind of pro-business candidate, if he was to succeed with this big infrastructure spending package, and if it was the right sort of infrastructure spending, you could, in theory, get a kind of reflation of the economy, slightly faster growth. However, that would also be inflationary, and the Fed would then be forced to tighten interest rates more quickly, and that would then push down on private consumption growth. So all of which sort of sends us back to where we started, and this idea that the US economy is in kind of this relatively steady, relatively okay place where the labour market has tightened, inflation is picking up, but from low bases, so consumers are still able to spend, and we expect growth of about 2.3% this year. And I think that would be fairly similar even if this big infrastructure spending happened, which we're dubious about.
Right. It's interesting that given the dynamic of the campaign, that Trump comes into the White House and inherits this sort of economy that's sort of buzzing along okay, and our forecast is for sort of more of the same.
Yes, I want to say that's true. But I don't want the impression for that to be that we don't think this is a significant event for the US.
Of course.
There are huge risks, not just to the US economy, but to the global economy as a result of the arrival of a president who threatens to upset long-standing diplomatic and global traditions. I think the ease with which he took that call from the Taiwanese president suggests that he fears nobody and doesn't understand why he should have to stand by any kind of precedents. And of course that poses risks for just about everywhere. Okay,
a good caveat, thank you. Let's move back across the Atlantic now. Of course, here we're all sort of abuzz about Brexit, and we've got a bit more clarity on what that actually means after Theresa May's most recent speech. And of course, now both sides can sort of begin to prepare their negotiating positions with a little bit more certainty. But none of this happens in a vacuum. Europe continues on its own political route. We have elections in two of the key members of the Union. We have elections in France and later on in Germany. Talk us through those elections briefly, what we expect the outcome to be, and particularly how we expect that to impact on the evolution of the European project.
Okay, a lot in that. In France, briefly. In France, we think that François Fillon of the Republican Party will win the presidential election. He will need to defeat Marine Le Pen of Front National to do that. The French presidential election is a two-step process. There's a wide first round, and then the candidates with the two highest proportions of the vote go through to the second round, which is a runoff. So we think Fillon will get enough support from centre and centre-left voters who are very keen to keep Le Pen out of power. If she gets, we think there's a 40% chance she might win the election. So we think there's a real
quite high.
It is. Yeah. You can't get much higher until it becomes our central view. Her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, ran in the runoff in 2002, and I think most of France's horror, he got 16% of the vote and was roundly defeated by Chirac, who got a kind of coalition of everybody to keep him out. His daughter will do much better. She might get twice what he got in the polls, and there is a risk that depending on what happens in France in the next year or so, she might get more. She's kind of not only exploited the heightened fear of Islamic terrorism in France at the moment, which is there for perhaps good reason, but also has married that to some sort of statist economic policies that are similar to what's been campaigned on with such success by Trump in the US. And those two things together, I think, have helped to drag Front National into kind of the political mainstream. She probably won't win, but she will also have half an eye on the next election in 2022. This is a long-term project for that party. Right. In Germany, we think that Angela Merkel will win another term at the head of another grand coalition with a slightly smaller majority than previously. She'll be desperate to campaign on anything other than migration. Germany took in a tremendous amount of refugees and immigrants in the past 2 years, and in doing so, I think she found herself quite out of step with the majority of the country's views. Her government has since tightened up its immigration policy, but she will try and talk about economic growth and industrial policy and education. She's got such deep reserves of political capital, having led Germany for a very long time, that I think that it's a fairly sure bet that she'll stay in power. What those two things means for Brexit, I think actually the main consequence of Theresa May's speech 2 days ago was that actually the negotiations with the EU are a lot less important than we thought they were going to be. What Mrs May has done is said that we will take an economic hit in order to regain control of our borders. Immigration is what matters, and we will accept that means that some companies are going to leave the EU. It means we're not going to be part of the single market. We don't want to be part of the customs union. We'd like to be as close as we can to you as possible, but we are our own independent sovereign nation. That's what we've learnt, which I think means that negotiations can actually be a bit smoother than we thought. Britain will no longer try and have its cake and eat it. That means a worse outlook, I think, for the UK economy. Right. But that's her interpretation of what her mandate was to deliver Brexit.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to China, and where we have Xi Jinping, probably the most powerful Chinese leader in a generation, looking to consolidate his own central grip on the state apparatus in China in this meeting of the Politburo Standing Committee late in the year. How's the economy going to behave? Is it going to help him in his aims? And what happens afterwards?
Okay, so we're expecting a relatively quiet year in China in 2017. The economy's in this long-term slowdown as it matures. So growth last year was 6.7%. the government is targeting around 6.5% this year, and it'll get close to that, we think. There will be plenty of government stimulus to make sure it does reach those targets, because in this particular year, with this meeting at the end of the year, as we mentioned, stability is essential. We are trying to look a bit further beyond this year, because we think there are worries on the horizon. We've talked a bit before, haven't we, about the level of Chinese indebtedness. Private debt in China is now, we think, around 200% of GDP.
Wow.
That is around the level that in other countries has caused economic crisis. So this is the similar level that Japan had during its lost decade at the end of the 80s. It's the similar level to what the US had prior to the subprime crisis in 2008. It's way above what Mexico had when it had its peso crisis in the 90s. You know, this is a level that generally sets off alarm bells.
Yep.
So if Xi is able to pack the PSC with his allies, if that cements his position, we think that might embolden him enough to pursue some significant economic reforms in 2018 to try and wean the economy off this credit growth that we've seen has exploded in recent years. The caveat of that, of course, is that growth will then have to come from elsewhere, and we think it'll be a lot slower in 2018 as a result. And the world economy won't have seen a slowdown in China like it in recent times. So a lot of other countries, those that have reoriented their economies to focus on exporting to China, countries like perhaps Australia, Chile, as well as those economies that trade intensively with China, like South Korea and Taiwan, are all going to feel the chill from this. We think 2018 could be a pretty difficult year for the global economy. But the important thing to note with this is that that's actually the benign scenario. Right. This is the scenario where the Chinese government takes control of its economy and sorts out a systemic problem. If Xi doesn't get the PSC stacked in the way that he wants it, or has a loss of nerve perhaps, or it doesn't work, the reckoning for the Chinese economy could be a lot worse further down the line.
At the same time, or further down the line?
Potentially further down the line, but it could be at any point where we get a bursting of a property bubble, or
a proper hard stop.
Yes, which would have even greater consequences for the rest of the world.
Right. Okay, thanks. That's a nice alarming note. It's a big world. There's lots of other places that we haven't spoken about. I think we'll leave those for next time, because we've used up a lot of time on what I think are the core issues for the global outlook for the coming year. So let's do that. Let's hold that off for next time. Please join us then. And in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us this time. Goodbye.